I'm actually in the process of updating my Master CFI, but 4-time Master CFI Aerobatics. Head coach of the UND team, like I mentioned. We've won 10 national collegiate championship titles as an aerobatic team. I'm a professor at the University of North Dakota, and last year I won nationals in the intermediate category flying a Super Decathlon. So a lot of it is how can we get more energy out of the aircraft, as well as making sure that it's as precise as possible, because the decathlon is gigantic. So if you do it right, it's rewarded. If you're off by a little bit, you'll have something to work on, and it'll tell you. it's very, very noticeable. And so we'll show some video a little bit later to look at that too. So the plan, we'll look at some rules of aerobatics first, get into some gateway maneuver basics, and then I've got some secret weapons to help power things up a little bit. So the cardinal rules of aerobatics is number 1, dive for speed, miss the ground, and don't mess it up. Those are tongue-in-cheek, obviously. Really what we're looking at is if you're starting off and want to really perfect the aircraft, any aircraft you transition, get some instruction in the plane, and ground critiquing and coaching is invaluable, because ultimately it doesn't matter how good the maneuver feels in the aircraft, is what does it look like from the ground if you're looking at aerobatic competition. Then make sure with the aerobatic instruction you're mastering spins and upsets, completely confident in the full envelope of your aircraft. With a few tricks I'll talk about today with how to get the aircraft through certain maneuvers, it minimizes the potential for spins and upsets, but when we're trying something new, it's always a possibility. So if you've got that in your back pocket, then you're not really concerned about what the airplane will do, because you know. And then after that, make sure you master your aircraft. Some bonuses that helps is get to a judge's school. And so when we look at competition, there's a few basics introductions that we look at and we can start with without going into the nitty-gritty bureaucracy of everything that a judge is figuring out. But the basic rules is the line at the proper angle? Are the loops round? And are the rolls consistent and crisp? That's the really, really basics of it. So getting a good radius on a loop where it's looking round, setting the line angles correctly with the proper bank angle. So the basics with judges is if it's off by 5 degrees, it's a 1-point deduction out of 10. So everything starts as a 10, and then it's multiplied by the difficulty of that maneuver to output a score. So every 5 degrees off in pitch or bank or heading is going to be a 1-point deduction. So we can see deductions can rack up pretty fast potentially. And so having that line set works really, really well. Now with this in mind, the very, very first thing is lines, and we can call their takeoff shallow, but there's a few other things to progress skills as well. So my mentor and coach talks about first, master your maneuver. Next, figure out energy to link them together, because that's what a sequence or an air show sequence is going to be, is you're not just doing one and then, okay, we're going to break off. And it's not like getting our private pilot where you do a steep turn and, okay, now we're going to do stalls next. Okay, let me set up and re-clear the area and, okay, figure it out. No, you got to just kind of go into it and roll. You're in your confined space. It's already clear. So we figure out the energy management from maneuver to maneuver. Then we got to get into our competition mode. So letting the judges know through a box entry that you are consistent and where you want to be with the right energy, right power. And then after that, we can start finessing the maneuvers once you've got them down and working well to present the aircraft. Have a cadence and a flow. A loop is going to look better if it's in the center than if it's way over to the side. So different things like that to increase our score and potential of doing well and just make the flow work. So with our basic maneuvers, I'm going fast so I can get to the video parts. Lines, loops, and rolls are basically everything. If you've got that down, then everything else is just a combination. Now with lines, there's some challenges with it. You'll have to find what works for your aircraft. Sighting devices are extremely helpful, but knowing different references on the airplane work very, very well. So with a pole, what type of airplanes are we flying? We're just excited for aerobatics and interested in learning something a little bit new. It's easy to get into. Decathlons are easy to find and rent in a few areas. The Extra 300 series is out there to rent. There's a few areas that have S2 Pitzes. And each of them are going to have their unique eccentricities. But with the Decathlon, that's kind of my specialty. I've got 300 hours in extras, but I've got almost 2,200 hours in decathlons, and none of those are easy hours. Mainly teaching students how to get the aircraft to perform. But without a sighting device, there's a few references on the aircraft that work very well. With a sighting device, that helps, but sighting devices are not always perfect. And so there's a couple tricks of getting the line to work and how to get to where you want to go. So that starts with a good pull and just how do you get to the line, as well as having the angles that you need. One challenge, this is not to discourage anybody, but I got into a fun argument, and I talked about this in my last presentation too, is one of my mentors, and I was helped teaching him aerobatics, and I was safety piloting for him in contests, so that he could fly. I can't remember if he was able to have his medical or not, but there's two of us in the airplane and everything's all checked out and he's got to sign off, we're good. I think he did have a medical at the time. But we were flying, he had flown at a contest, I wasn't at it, but he gave me a call up that night and he's like, I'm upset, I'm angry. These scores, none of them are any good. I'm like, okay, well what's the problem? And so one of the maneuvers we have to usually get set up for a spin is a 45 line. You pull up, you go to 45. He says, well, I'm looking at these scores, and I've got a bad grade from this judge saying I was too steep, and I have a bad grade from this judge saying I'm too shallow. I'm like, then you got a perfect score. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, tell me what a perfect score is. He's like, it's a 10. The book says perfect is 10. I'm like, that's good, but not for a 45. 45s are subjective. They shouldn't be. You can protractor it, but when you're at different angles and things, you do your best judgment. And so if everyone says you're too shallow, meaning that you're here instead of at 45, then okay, then adjust. If everyone says you're too steep and you're going too high and not at the 45, okay, make an adjustment. But if you think you're on and one judge saw something that they thought it was a little shallow and another judge saw something they thought it was a little steep, take it and run with it. The perfect score for 45 is like a 7 and everything else is gravy. So you don't have to get upset about some of the scores. If they are in conflict, as judges, we're all humans. There's different things that we pick out. And if you've flown with a lot of different instructors, even describing a landing or a different maneuver, they can all basically be saying the same thing, but have a different take or a different nitpicky item that's their specialty. That's what they want to see. So those are, but to get to a line, some tricks with going to 45 and to a vertical is always one, making sure you've got a sight reference. So as soon as you pull up about 20 degrees, there's nothing but blue in front of you. There is nothing to see. So you want to check the wing. It doesn't matter which wing. Most people put a sighting device on the left because for whatever reason it feels easier to turn left as opposed to right. Or my neck has been trained that way, I don't know. But pick a wing. Now you can see the horizon. And you'll be able to see if the wing drops, okay, I've got some roll or something I need to fix. If you're pitched, now you know exactly what the attitude is because you're seeing it on the wing. If there's yellow, you'll see it move back and forth. But get a good pull in and go. So check the wing. We've got that. And then next is how you pull. Set a G, and then you'll increase the pressure as you go, and that's going to accelerate it. And then as you get to the line, you can always unload, and that sets a good, like, I'm there now. If you're pushing, there's a couple push maneuvers in Sportsman. So there's a slow speed push to 45. If you let the aircraft just kind of descend and get there, it takes a ton of altitude. If you push with authority and just get it like hook and down, then it does be like, oh, yep, they're on it. And you'll find that you have a couple hundred extra feet by the end of that maneuver and energy to do the rest of the sequence. So you're not, there's just different things like that that can scrub energy off or try to gain it. That are really helpful. And then when it comes to vertical, same thing. Bring it to vertical. Make sure you're checking the wing as you get there, hit it, and then keep an eye on the wing because the aircraft oftentimes will want to drift. The Decathlon likes to pitch backwards as you get slower and get higher. So just watching it and letting the airplane tell you what you need, it'll talk to you and tell you what you want to do. And so that's kind of a plane-to-plane pull. And then the tricky ones are now trying to figure out, once you got the line that you need, how do you figure out how to roll on the line and do things like that? But we'll get to rolls in a moment. Next, actually I have a slide for line. There we go. This one's looking at tracks. If you're level, don't worry about necessarily the wing. A few other tricks for energy. There has to be a level line in between maneuvers. In air shows, what's level? It doesn't matter. But with competition, it's kind of your way of resetting. You did a loop, level, that loop is done. Okay, wait a moment, now get into the next thing, give it a pause of a couple seconds. But with using the level line, they do anticipate if you're going into a spin next, it should be low speed. You should be deck angle high and slow flight. And as long as the CG is tracking straight, we're good. High speed, lower deck angle is what they're looking for. And then another trick is just make it look level. If you're descending, just barely. The aircraft will tractor through and it'll have more energy to do the next thing. It won't slow down. Level flight in a decathlon is about 125 to 130 full power, but maneuver entry speeds are 140 to 160. And if I come out of a maneuver and I hold perfectly level and wait 5 seconds, it's going to be at 125. So you can use gravity a little bit, so barely, just don't tell the judges. But everything is on what do they see, and if they don't see it, then it didn't happen. Those are different tricks. So we talk about aerobatic level, and this is true and works well with all of the aircraft, just to give a little bit of a power advantage. Now with the 45s, unlike air shows, our 45s are not supposed to be wind corrected, so the angle may look different if you have a strong wind. You can play that somewhat, but start with just getting it, and this is where does it look about right in the airplane, and does it look good from the ground, is where we're looking at that. And then with vertical as well, we've got the zero lift axis. Now there's a few challenges with that. Different aircraft do have different angle of incidence and different appearances. The Decathlon has, I think, 1.5 degrees, and then there's about a 1.5 or 1 degree on the wing itself because it's not perfectly symmetrical. And so there's different times depending on what you're doing that, number one, fly what looks good. So if you're getting ground critique, if it looks vertical, fly the vertical. If you have to start adding rolls on it or something, then it is going to have to be on the zero lift axis. So if I'm flying a hammer with a roll and I want the roll to square up just right, I can either fix it from what looks right, or I do the zero lift off the wing and fly the wing, and then it rolls really good. And I'll show you how to figure that out too. If it's just a vertical and nothing else is on it, the fuselage looks better if it's just a little bit past. And that's all from ground critique. So there's different times where I'll fly the wing or I'll fly the paint job to make it look good. One of our friends is a dynamicist that built his own airplane, and he's like, I won't argue with the judges, but I know exactly what my zero lift axis is, and if I fly it, I get deducted at least 1.5 points. He's like, I could bring out the drawings. I know how I built it. This is what it is. He's done all the math. He's a brilliant gentleman. But that doesn't matter. It's how did it look? And that's the challenge we've got. So that's where ground critique and things like that really do help out and make that work. So there we go. There's our vertical. Might look weird with a Decathlon or something similar as Citabria, which has a lot more angle on it. And that's where the ground critique is checking. Judges get this slide. I stole it from the judges book. So they've seen this. They know it's what's supposed to be. It's supposed to be off the wing. But if you're watching an airplane fly that way and you're like, that looks weird, then it's going to have a slight downgrade. And so it's, how's it look? How's it work? And that's what's going to make it look good and make it fly. Now, the real gateway maneuver is trying to perfect a good slow roll. So, slow rolls. Oh yeah, that's your airplane. This is the airplane with all the swag on it. So to get a good slow roll to work, especially if you're just starting, don't start it perfect because it's really easy to, well, there's a couple different steps that work out. But the first thing I usually have everybody do is just simply fly a ballistic aileron roll. Get to your target VA speed for the ailerons, pitch up about 20 to 30 degrees, and just lay the ailerons over and let the aircraft come around. Getting in aerobatics, it's super comfortable. You're not hanging in the straps at all. It's a good way of introducing a passenger to aerobatics if you want to show off in the airplane but don't want to have to clean up the airplane afterwards. They can see what upside down looks like, and it's not threatening. You're not tossing the straps or anything, so it works really well. And I'll have to talk a lot louder, sorry. Of course they'll start the EPU. But the goal is you're doing this. What you're looking for is that you get the pitch up, and then as you roll, you want the nose to go straight down and not change on heading or anything. And what you're finding is where the neutral elevator position is. Because when you're knife edge, if you're pulling back, it's going to turn. If you're pushing, it's going to go the other way in a negative fashion. It'll be very exciting. So you're just looking for straight up, straight down. Now you know where that neutral position is. The second step is, okay, let's make sure the seatbelts are tight, and then let's fly it inverted. And as you're doing that, go ahead and check the instruments, but find what is holding you level at that speed. And pick the sight picture out. Airplanes. In the Decathlon, you're not looking at the spinner, you're looking at that aim point in the windscreen that's at part way up, and you pick your spot out, but when you're inverted, it's slightly higher. And that's just, again, geometry of the airplane and the wing. So you find that in whatever aircraft it is, and even in the monoplanes, a lot of times it's going to shift a little bit, because with the extra, you've got to hold a little bit of angle of attack. I'll exaggerate it, but when you're upside down, it's a little bit of angle of attack as well. So that's going to change, minor, but just a little bit. So you find that position, and that becomes your target. So once you know that that's where you need to be, well, then you go into the roll, make sure the aircraft gets there, and do the controls with whatever you need to do. So with controls, 2,700 or 2,800? No, just kidding. With the flight controls, things to remember is that the controls are pilot-centric. When you pull back, it's not going away from the ground, it's going towards your face. When you push forward, it's always going to go towards your feet. Rolling is rolling, and then when you push rudder, it's ear to ear. So if we separate it from the horizon and then reattach it, when you get knife edge, you're going to need rudder going that way. When you're here, you're going to need lift going that way, so you have to push towards your feet. When you're back knife edge, it's rudder to keep it up. But with that, you just do what it takes to get you that target point, and then keep it coming and bring it around. And we do that a few times. The next step, once you're fairly comfortable with it, you may not feel it's perfect. How do I find where any imperfection in that roll is going to be? Is then next step is do multiples. Because in the first one, if there's any small error, it's going to multiply on the second one. And if you keep going, you'll see what you need to do to kind of fix it when you're comfortable. Now, at any time, if the aircraft is not where you want it to be, just recover back to upright. But that's where you're looking, okay, am I hitting my target? Am I going around? And then using your periphery, is the roll rate consistent? Because it doesn't need to be maximum for the airplane, it just needs to keep going and be solid. And when you stop it, it needs to stop on that point. And then from there, you can build up into point rolls and 8-point roll, 4-point, 2-point, 8-point. If you're really 16, if you want to be really weird, I used to make my students count up. I do all the odd ones and make my students do even. So I'd roll once, have them do a 2-point, and then I have a model for this, so I'm using my hand. And then I do a 3-point because it's goofy to try to get 3 points in, then have them do the 4-point, and then try to make the old Pontiac, with Plymouth symbol with a 5-point roll. And then if they want to try 6, it's goofy, but you can do 6 points. A 7-point, though, is really just a messed up 8-point roll, so I kind of skip 7, go to 8, then jump to 16. But those take a while. But all of that and working on point rolls and slowing the roll down will help kind of figure out where do the controls need to be if you're focused on that aim point. Now, with rolling in particular, as soon as we get motion this way, our eyes tend to relax and focus at the panel or at the spinner. And if that's where your eyes are looking, you won't really see what the horizon is doing. It'll be there, and you have it, but it's not as precise. So it takes some discipline to be focused on far on the horizon as you can, and then let the airplane move around that point that you're focused on. And the more you do it, then the easier it is to see, okay, it's pushing this way, so don't push so hard. Now I start getting the push in. So for flight controls, I don't know if anyone wants flight controls. I got some competitors that are like, it rolls. But there's a few tricks we can do, especially with something lower powered. And the whole goal with the flight controls is not to force it into any position. The game is using just enough. I think I saw an interview with Mike Goulian, who they asked about with Red Bull what the team philosophy was. And you have to care just enough. If you're really amped up, you're too amped up, it's easy to get twitchy. If you don't care and lackadaisical, then what are we doing? And it's easy to just not, make mistakes because we're not paying attention. So it's being right on that edge. And so the same thing with the controls. If you can do that with the controls, the airplane will respond better. You won't lose as much speed, and you'll be able to roll it faster as you get more handier with it. But with the Decathlon, it is going to have to get the nose up. And so we don't want to get here and then force the nose, because that's a lot of drag. Instead, you want to let it go up. So adverse yaw is going to pull the nose to the right. So if you add just a hair of back pressure, it brings it up. Then here you're adding top rudder, so it's going to keep it high. And let the nose stay there, but you're not trying to raise it, you're just trying to hold in that position, and that should put you at your target point. So now the stick will smoothly go forward to that -1G, and hopefully you're cutting the horizon with that target that we figured out from flying inverted. And then as you get past here, because when you turn, if I'm going this way, the yaw is going to kick that way, so I need rudder that's over here. The problem is it's still your right foot when you're going left. It's a weird, goofy thing. So you'll hold a little bit of right rudder till about there, then transition to the top, and then we'll start pulling the stick back through neutral and then back to level. So rolls are the hardest one. All the things are moving all the time. The only thing that's not is usually pegging the aileron or working on it. But with that rudder coming in, with left rudder and left aileron, it does sometimes accelerate. So that's where you're using your periphery to let it come back. And I can show, yeah, bonus. After you do regular roll where you're happy, you don't need to be full, but at good speed, try a couple multiple rolls at speed. The decathlon, if I start at 130, by the time I'm on roll number 4, we're doing about 90, and by about number 10, you're in slow flight doing 70 and having to really drive the nose a lot. But then you really know what all the controls are doing. You've got to really work it and get it going. So that exercise, as long as you're at altitude and the airplane is happy and you're not losing it, that's actually how I ended up teaching myself rollers. But that's how it works. The only reason I've done that many is we used to do high school campers. And so we had one of my pilots, I don't know why he did it, but he went way up to the top of our airspace and then spun down and did like 13 turns. And so I had another student that, he did 13. And I'm like, I don't want to climb that high. I want to do more than climb and do one spin with a lot of turns. Like, I want to do, like, we should do loops and maneuvers and play with G and roll. Like, how about I just roll it 13 times? He's like, oh, that'd be awesome. Like, okay, cool. So they get to the end of the practice area and have to turn around, but I'm still on number 9. I'm like, I guess we'll try turning while rolling. And so that's kind of how I initially figured out how to do a roller. But those are all, like I said, building progression, then we can make it a little bit more interesting. So with the rolls, here is a super slow roll. I need to open it in the proper. So with aircraft, roll rate is an interesting one. With roll rates, that's not what I want. We're running a little slow on this one. That's your normal roll. And when training, it is good to play with video a little bit. It does have some limitations if it's not exactly where your eye line is, but you can get a lot of good feedback from it. I like using a 360 camera. I got the Garmin ones when we were training for Worlds because it would self-stitch in it, and I could watch on my phone right away. So if I knew something weird happened on the flight, then I could check it, see what was going on, and then try to correct it right away. So, that's why I used it. And then I like posting some videos, so I have a few of those as well. Now with the roll rate is always a contentious argument. We always want more because more is more, but there is a limit. The decathlon at max deflection will do about 90 degrees per second. That's actually really comfortable. Does anyone fly Cirruses? Cirrus pilot. If you go max deflection, that's 90 degrees a second. The Cirrus will actually roll as fast as the decathlon into a steep turn. I don't roll past that. It's a Cirrus. But yeah, it scared my instructors. I'd be below VA and be like, wham! And like, oh, okay, steep turn. So don't try it in a Cirrus, but that's about the roll rate. It's pretty light and it goes. The extras will do 400 to 420 a second. Pitses are in, I think, the mid 300s, give or take. The Panzel that we were flying, we clocked at 445, I think, a second at maximum deflection. And these are doing level to level. In the vertical at speeds, you can get them to go a little bit faster, but that's where it stops. It's fun, but it's timing. And if you can perfect it at low speed, then you do everything faster at higher speed, and it works out. The monoplanes tend to be, instead of having to like really push the stick, it's more rudder. It's top rudder, stop. You do move the stick a little bit, but it's very small. Decathlon, though, is fun. You learn it in that, you can transition anything. However, we're usually looking at maximum roll rate. So I was trying to teach my students or give them some demo of, all right, well, what about doing it slow? So this one starts with something that's just moderate speed. And there's that 360 camera I was talking about. So I can make people sick and look at the wing. But this gives you, here's your target. You're watching here, letting it make that sacred circle coming through. And now it's back down a little bit lower in the windscreen compared to when we were upside down. So you're finding that target point and going. I'm at the end of the box, so I'm going to turn around and then we'll do the super slow roll. So there'll be a hammerhead, which you'll see a vertical pull, and how kind of that works. So we'll accelerate to the line and then unload. So stick's coming back, the rate isn't changing much, and I think I wasn't quite at high speed, so we just let that one go. But there's our pivot for the hammer, and coming back down. So the students want to see a slow one. I did one with a student, so we did do this 2 up as well, and at this point I'm solo, but I'll do the same thing. But we'll just run it for 20 seconds, and it's a 20-second roll to get it to come around. Now there is this minor problem, which is the wing blankets the rudder right there, and it has a little wiggle to it. But then just let it keep going really slow, and then you have to really, doing that, you'll have to really work the rudder and make sure the position is where it's at. And you're not worried about it going fast, you're just making the airplane go where it needs to go. But it does take some, in a decathlon, it'll take some effort. And that's another thing you can do, even if it's a extra or an MX or a monoplane, is just slow it down a little bit and make sure you're at the points you want to be at. And then as you speed up, you just narrow those tolerances down. And it helps out. Now, when we look at a few different things with aircraft, and I can show some different sequences. There's a couple different secret weapons. One is understanding what the judges are looking for. That's where judges school comes into play. But with judges school, we have to be a little bit careful because a judge is going to have criteria that they're looking for, things that can sometimes help us with what the maneuver is supposed to look like, but not always be instructional about how to do the maneuver. So for the roll, they're looking for it to go straight. Like that's it. Constant roll rate, no change in altitude. Pitch can change quite a bit. When I first started competing, we had Joe Haycraft and Giles Henderson that used to compete in clipped wing Cubs. They didn't even have inverted systems, but they'd be going through and do a slow roll. So they start at high speed like this, and then as they roll, they've got a cambered airfoil. So they're like, whoa, and they come through and pitch way up, and then they come back down. But the CG would track perfectly straight. They're like, it's a 10. It looked weird, but it was a 10. Like CG, perfectly straight line, roll rate, always consistent, but it was just weird. I had to get the airplane to, you got to keep it flying. And it was amazing to watch. It was really cool. But that's what they're looking for, straight lines, consistent roll rate, and then you want to be consistent in the roll, especially if you're doing point rolls or even the roll itself. So one of the challenges that we've got as you step up into higher performance aircraft is the roll rate is so high that sometimes we get timid. I don't want to overdo it and finish wrong. And so a lot of times we'll go fast and then get to here and be like, there. Okay, got it, I'm right on. See, it was perfect. It's like, yeah, but you did like oh wait, hold on. And the roll rate changing makes it look goofy too. So it's actually better if you just do a slower roll rate, just go pop, it's the same the whole time, pop, stop. And that's kind of neat with the decathlon, is you can just whoop and it goes slow enough. You're like, yep, okay, 4 seconds later, ha, got it. But those are different challenges that we run into, which is different aircraft. And so sometimes in the lower categories, as pilots are building proficiency in their machine, there's nothing wrong with flying an extra in primary or sportsman, but as you're building proficiency, the airplane has so much more to give that it's easy to, like, sometimes you watch people get a little weird with it, or it looks kind of odd. But when they figure it out, and the extra is a really tricky one because the new wings are amazing. You just let go and they stop. The old ones, there's no centering feel, so you have to be on it. And I know when I first started it, I'd be like, all right, good roll rate, and stop, and then it start drifting the other way. I'm like, okay, I overdid it. But finding out where that center spot is and where that is becomes good. And then just being consistent. It doesn't always need to be full, but it needs to be consistent. And that's what a judge is looking for. The next thing is the loops around. So as we go slower, it's going to take a little less G. So like straight lines and round loops. So with something like a Cuban where we're going into a 45 down, get it to the 45. But as we do that, it's going to be, okay, good pull. Keep the stick pressure in, or at least the position about the same, works out really well. As the aircraft slows down, the G will relax. And then in the decathlon here, you're going to have to relax a little bit to get it to fly. Not to stop, though. It's really easy to hit negative, and then it just stops and tractors, and then it's like, it's not all the way around then. But keep the nose moving, and then we'll float it to about the 45, unload, lock, find your spot in front, and then roll. We talked a lot about rolls. You'll have to use the most controls when you're level. When you're vertical, you don't need to worry about rudder so much. There is a hair's breadth of rudder to compensate for it hitting the tail, but barely anything. But once you've got that figured out, it doesn't take anything else. You're not messing with the elevator, it's just aileron. And then the 45s are a combination of kind of those, it's in between those two. So you'll need some rudder, and you'll need forward stick to hold negative, but it's not as excessive or as much as it seems to be when you're flying level. And that's normal. It's really easy to overdo it or underdo it on those lines. Now, with the other thing I mentioned with going straight, if you're not sure you're vertical, and you want to know if you're vertical on the wing, and you don't have someone to ground critique you, it's right before the contest, you want to tune up, go vertical, and then try even just a quarter aileron roll. If you're perfectly vertical, the wing will track straight across the horizon. If you are past vertical and you go left, the wing will go up. If you're under, it'll go down. And if you're not sure, you can always take your hand or grab a little thing, get a little Hot Wheels with you and just be like, okay, this is what I saw on the airplane, which way was it? And that'll work, because sighting devices are not necessarily perfect. In a few of the aircraft I've flown, it was perfect when you pulled the vertical, but not if you pushed the vertical. It'll flex and do goofy things on the end of a bar. I mean, it's carbon fiber, so it don't flex much, but there's just a little bit of weirdness with it. The one on the Decathlon, you've got to mount it, it's in the star, it's not going to flex, but it may or may not be perfect depending on your sitting height that day, or if you just got your parachute packed slightly differently, or whatever it is, and you're in a different position. You got to find what looks good with the aircraft and is going to make sense. But if you're not sure, it's the easy way of tuning up. We worked that one. It worked out really well. And yeah, that's a quick way. Now, then you figure out how much then can you get out of the aircraft. And there's a few ballistic tricks. Oh, that makes it a lot easier. There's a few ballistic tricks we can do as well. I was going to see if I could find a "he's going ballistic, Mav" quote from Top Gun. Because we heard it, but what does that mean? Does anyone know what that means? What are ballistics? Yeah, guns, or it's a parabola. It's a parabolic arc is what we're looking at. Oh, I was going to hook up my drawing pad. That's okay. So what we're doing is, if we look at, maybe I will draw it, because it's computer gets kind of funny. But what we're looking at with, I don't know if anyone done a lot of aerodynamic work, but as you go through speed, drag changes as you go faster. So in slow speed flight, you need a lot of power, drag's really high. You need a lot of lift, and that's really what's coming from, is a lot of angle of attack, a lot of induced drag is where the drag is at low speed. And then as you get a little bit faster, you start getting your glide range, and the drag goes down, and that's going to be closer to your best glide. And then as you go faster, you need a lot more power. And some of my friends that have upgraded engines realize that power doesn't always make you go faster. It's making the airplane cleaner. But you're going to top out at some point, and that's, again, high drag. So you got high drag at high speed, high drag at low speed. And the drag at low speed is because you're making lift. And so if there's a way to then go in a ballistic arc where you're not making lift anymore, you're at 0G, then the wing's not working. It's not fighting anything. And so now all the thrust you have, it's not trying to hold the airplane up anymore, it's accelerating you. And so with things like a half loop, the judging criteria is half loop up, you can momentarily pause inverted, and then roll upright, and that's your Immelman, half loop up and roll on top. Well, if you do that, you got all the G, you're slowing down, now you're at negative G, and you're basically in slow flight. There's very little speed at the top of most loops. And so, great, I'm at the edge, and now I need to roll. Well, if you want to fake it, don't tell the judges, then you pull hard, get to the top, and if this is your level line here, about 5 degrees before, go ballistic. Hit 0, hit the aileron. Because the wings aren't fighting anymore, and they're not fighting each other, it'll roll faster than it would at that speed otherwise. And everything is going towards acceleration. Now, if you stay ballistic, you're going to end up downhill, so we don't want that. We want to fly straight. So go ballistic. When you get about knife edge, top rudder, and then you're going to have to start, well, I got to go from inverted. Knife edge, top rudder, so in this case left, and then you'll start easing the stick back, and it'll fly away. Now, the cool part about doing that is people worry about, if you do it where you were in slow flight, inverted, -1, and don't have a lot of power, and you roll the way you're supposed to, you have a ton of rudder in, and the stick's way forward, and you've got power on. Basically everything for an inverted spin. And so people get worried about that, and the wing drops, and we start losing it. And if that happens, just relax, actually let it go ballistic, it'll fly, and then go upright, recover, it's fine. But to avoid that, if you went ballistic here and hit the aileron, no rudder, You're accelerating, so you're away from your critical angle of attack. You're at 0, so there is no, you're not anywhere near stall at that point, and the whole threat of potentially spinning out of it goes away. There's no issue anymore. Hazards are gone, airplane performs better, and you'll be able to accelerate out of it. Now, aircraft will have different characteristics for doing that. Like I said, if anyone likes decathlons, I fly decathlon with the metal prop because I like MT, but with a working airplane, we blow the seals too much, so I like the metal now. With the new Trailblazer prop, it's got a lot of really good low-end pull. So I can start 150, pull, be minimal speed on top, go ballistic, let accelerate, do a point roll, and end up at about 100 to 110 by the time I'm finished rolling, which is goofy, because in the normal airplane, I'm 80 and trying to accelerate at 80. But I'm nowhere near stall, though. So stall's down at 50. Speed is 54, but with power, it's slower. So all different tricks. Now, that's a way of getting a lower powered aircraft, a Taylorcraft, the decathlons, clipped wing Cubs through some of these maneuvers. Does it still apply to a Pitts or an extra or something that's got more power? And the answer is yes. You can get an extra or even a Pitts S1 if you do it just right and give it a little bit of time and just let it go downhill barely to do a double Immelman, which is kind of goofy when you think about it. I came in, no speed, I accelerate, hey, I'm at 120, okay, give it a moment, hey, 140 again, go up again. And that's not normally what you typically think about that aircraft being capable of, but it's possible. I can't do that in the decathlon. It'll take forever to get to speed, but with the extra, yeah, if you let it ballistically go and accelerate, you have the potential of going up more. You can come through and then do a hammer or Humpty Bump or something, and that's where we look at some of the sequences of, well, how would you move a high-speed figure above one that ends at no speed? Like, well, you're going to have to finesse it. I know there's some challenges that we do. And that's where we get the aircraft to do a little bit more. I did play with advanced with a decathlon because I did. But when doing that, I always fly well within the capability of the airplane. And so that's where you're going to have to set your own discipline and limits of what you're trying to get out of the machine and what you want to do with it. So with G limits, the more G you pull, the more drag you make. So that's that induced drag curve part again. So more lift is more drag, more angle of attack is more drag. And so that's one thing to watch out for. Each aircraft is going to have its own comfortable spot of what's going to give you the most vertical to get more energy. Usually with a decathlon, it's around, well, if you want the most vertical, it's about 2.5 G, but you have no line. It's like rolling to it and then hammering out. I want to say at Pitts is around 3.5, and the extra is around, I want to say 4. Now, we'll make compromises all the time. If I pulled a 6 and an extra, then I have a line that looks longer. I won't go up higher, but I have a line that will appear longer for judges. And so you're just making compromises to make everything fit together. But when I played with the advanced, the snap speed on a decathlon is max at 90, so jets. So I don't want to hurt anything, so I'm going to do my personal max snap speed is 80. And it's a decathlon. It's going to look dumb and blorpy, and it's not going to be Rob Holland or Sean Tucker, like pop, blah, it's not going to do that. So if you understand that what the airplane is and what's capable of and keep it well within limits, then it's not a problem. But as soon as you start pushing it, then it becomes a little bit more of an issue. But that's where last year through the intermediate sequences, I did play with advanced once. And the aircraft will make it through. It just depends on what we're trying to do. Oh, and then we can do more advanced figures as well. Oh, I got reverse wedges. So anyway, I can show intermediate unknown. Intermediate unknowns are fun. This is not going to play on the right screen. There we go. Go. So here's from Nationals last year. It started inverted, which made things more entertaining. If the contrast is a little bad, I apologize. It does get better once we get through the first 2 maneuvers. But they didn't get my wing wags, darn. But start inverted, go to upright, and then there was a spin and a quarter. And if there's any maneuvers we want to discuss or go over, I have no problem talking about those. But we'll get the spin in. And then it's going to progress. So there. And this is the cool part about the camera. And so if you're often, you'll get good about what you need to fix. If it's on and it looks on, then it's good. There are ways you can hide things. And because of the energy it has, my vertical roll is not always going to be centered. I'll do the best I can. There's a vertical quarter roll. Now it's going to do a rolling turn, and then it'll be a down 45. And you'll see on the 45, I do push kind of hard, because if you get it there, you'll save energy. If you just let it drift to 45, then you'll lose another 200 out of the sequence. So roller stopped, and then push it. Now the arc is very small, and you get to it. So if you're going to push to 45, or doing sportsman or something like that, get a little authority on it, and it'll save you at the end of the sequence. So you've got more to work. The Immelman trick is one that's going to be important this year in the sportsman sequence. But we're just setting timing for centering the roll on the line to the Cubans. So coming through. Flew away inverted. There's going to be, I think, a down line, and then I think there's an avalanche after that. And then we'll turn around with a Humpty. Try to remember the full part of the sequence. But at this point, I'm looking around the box to get placement, so I have enough room for the next figures. So flying inverted for a while and then dropping it down. Next is the avalanche. So pulling through, and you'll see the rate stop a little bit, and then there's where you load it up to get the snap to work. Get the aircraft to stop and centering it at the apex, and then coming around. And that reminds me, we can talk loops too. When to float. Floating is good. I mentioned it a little bit, but we can talk more on the loops. So now we got, let's see, I think it's a wedge. Wedge is next. There we go, that's turned around. Now at the end of a wedge, the key is you're going faster. So as you get upright and it speeds up, it's going to want to pull up. So you got to keep it on the point. And that's where that focus on the point. Don't let your eyes focus in the aircraft. Keep your point going and then go from there. So I think it's a Humpty, and then here's a hammer, and then there'll be a half loop up with a snap on top. But that's where you have to fly. And this aircraft's painted really nice. The line does actually match, I think, the chord line of the wing really well. So everything syncs up really good. So when you're vertical and it rolls, it just looks really good. But now it takes speed, and I mentioned that ballistic part off the half loop up, but it's going to be a snap, so we'll stop it early so that it tractors and goes the way it's supposed to. And it'll stop, and then it'll pull away. And then rock the wings. But that was last year's Nationals unknown, and then I've got last year's. Normally I try to make video of each year's sequence. I haven't had time this year to get good video inside or outside yet of this year's, but we'll see if we can get something on the next couple contests. That's kind of how that works a little bit. All right, one thing I was going to mention, making loops round. The same ideology that goes into a turnaround of point goes into making a round loop. So the faster you are, the more G you need. The slower you are, the less G you need. So when you start at high speed, it's going to be your maximum G. You can get on it pretty quick, and then it'll drive a radius. And then as you get on the top, you'll want to float about here. It's really easy if you're not watching the wing, though, to start here, and then the airplane kind of falls out. So get it to here first. Then you'll start the float, but as you go inverted, you're level, and it's going to start accelerating. So more acceleration means you have to start easing the stick back a little bit, and then get more G on the bottom. So I usually like going about 3 at the beginning, and then 3.5 at the end, or about 3.5 at the beginning, and then another half G at the end as well, because you'll accelerate with gravity. And that works pretty well. But the float is not going to necessarily be at the apex perfectly. It's going to be slightly early in it, and then you'll have to start working it in as the speed builds on the aircraft. So that's that component. And then there's another thing I had thought of, but that works. Anything anyone wants to talk about? Specific maneuvers, treble points, fun stuff? I just like having fun with airplanes. So, yeah. Ballistic and unloading are the same, yes. If you're at 0 angle of attack, there's no stall. It doesn't matter if you're 5 miles an hour or 500. There is no stall if there is no angle of attack. Now, there is a way of, there's tail slides and whip stalls. And so that's like the exception where we can put the aircraft into a position where you're normally, okay, this is getting maybe too ethereal. Normally when flying our aircraft, we don't have angle of attack indicators in most of them, but you do with the stick position. You'll find that if you're in the same weight and balance, same configuration, or really close, it doesn't really matter what the weather's doing, that it's always going to stall at a certain spot. In the decathlon, it's about an inch off of the full stop. So stalled, not stalled, stalled, not stalled. I don't need to do this to recover. I just need to have it not there when we're in normal flight. Where the exception to that is like a whip stall or a tail slide, where you put the aircraft in a position where you'll get slow enough that the angle of attack is going to drop to here, and now you are ballistic, but you have a high angle of attack, and it doesn't matter what you do with the elevator, it's going to go down in a moment. So that is the one exception. But other than that, yes, unloading, getting it, if you've got speed and you're going through and you're not at extreme angles on the airplane, then yeah, just unloading and relaxing and going ballistic, the exact same thing. It's kind of, like I mentioned, my mentor was a former fighter pilot and things, and so really we're using some of the military tactics, which is why it made its way in the Top Gun. People are like, okay, sounds cool, I guess we'll use it at the beach. But you know, that's where it came from, is if they're going ballistic, it means that they're trying to reduce as much drag as they can and get all the thrust to accelerate them out of whatever they're in to run away from the fight or to get away. And anytime you can, and it's kind of weird, anytime you can burn fuel when you don't need to burn fuel, is when you're going to gain energy out of it. So that's where with spins and things, we'll stop a spin and then add power on the down line. It's like, that's weird. Oddly enough, it saves altitude for a maneuver. So with a normal emergency spin recovery, I'll recover, and I don't care what my speed is. I want to be minimal, so I'll pull out of the dive, I save altitude, that's fine. During an aerobatic sequence, I'll spin, and we go in, and now I have a target. My next maneuver is going to be something that I probably need 140, 150, 160 for, so I need to get the speed. So now we're waiting for gravity to accelerate you, and you'll get there eventually, but if you work the power in, and now thrust is helping you get there, you'll accelerate faster than gravity will throw you at the ground now. So now you hit your target earlier and you pull out of the dive higher. So it's a weird paradox of, you know, why do we do the things we do? Now the challenge with that, and this is what I tell my students, especially as they're first starting out, is don't get jumpy on it. It adds yaw. So if you just barely recover, kind of wiggling around, and then you add, then yes, you can keep spinning or try spinning the other way. So it's always, okay, get it, feel the airflow hook up, because if you're doing stalls, you know, you get that point where it's like, tri-motor. You hit the point where like, hey, this does nothing anymore, and then as soon as you relax and it's flying, and you're like, oh, yep, it works. You can feel it kind of come alive and the power steering hit back in. You know, once you get that feel, you're like, oh yeah, now I can do whatever I want, and the airplane's not going to get weird if I add power. And that's where you add it on the down line to get it going. Same thing with doing hammers or something else. Now, if you have a fixed pitch propeller, follow the limits of the airplane. You may not want to add power. Some people do. I've heard rumors that they don't make power till they're 3,200. I'm not recommending that. But that's where you're looking at how that works. That one's a little bit trickier. Really, for the spin, I'm looking for the character and less concerned about the altitude. I'm always planning about 1,000, but really the decathlon's going to take about 800. Because you can try to make it flatter. Flatter will give you more drag and a little bit slower, and you can recover that way. Accelerating it can get you around faster potentially. So there's things you could play with. Each aircraft will do something a little bit different that way. But at that point, it's kind of, it's one of those where it's kind of like trying to apply stall technique to a Piper Cherokee. You know, I'm going to touch down, I'm going to drop flaps and things and get on the brakes. It's like, well, if you really need to, it's a Cherokee. It's not a STOL airplane. It's not going to, if you save 5 feet, usually because of the big Johnson bar, I have to relax as I lean forward. So I'd just be better off leaving it and holding it back and doing aerodynamic braking. So not to go into the weeds or anything, but that's kind of where I haven't seen a lot of value in trying to do that from a altitude standpoint. If it makes it look better for you, then yes. And that's some of the challenges with like basic spin and recoveries is I have to warn my students that the decathlon is kind of like when it spins, that's the only thing I do. Bring the stick back, push the rudder in before it stalls, so getting slow before it stalls, and everything will drop at once, so good entry. And then I just hold it there, and then recover, it's anticipating when it's just rudder and move the stick, and then it's done. When you start getting into some of the extras and monoplanes, I did have to do weird things in the extra to make it look normal. So if you talk to some of the unlimited pilots, like, oh yeah, you gotta like get in and then you flatten it and then you accelerate it and then you do this and then you're really not in a spin in this part, but then you have to pop it back in. The extra did a weird thing where it would drop in just fine, and as you get to one turn, it like stops, and it's like, oh yeah, we're still going. It's like, well, how did it do a hesitation spin? I don't know what it's kind of an exaggeration, but it has a weird dynamic to it. And I don't know if anyone else has experienced that before with that type of plane, but it's got a weird dynamic where it just doesn't look as consistent. So then they will start doing weird stuff, be like, it's consistent when I do this, and I'll make it flat with power, and then I'll do this. And it's like, okay, that's fine. And as you get handier, there's little tricks that you can kind of blend in and feed things in to just make sure it stops very precisely. But the first part is just timing. For the decathlon, it's 100 degrees. So it's 100 degrees before you're at your heading, you push rudder and then move the stick forward at about 45, and it just goes, and then you're there. As soon as it stops, neutralize and let it fly, and then it goes. The 1.5 turn spin will look cleaner because the geometry. So ones will put you here, so as you recover, you got rudder, stick forward, and then get it to vertical. The 1.5, the geometry comes around where it wants to put you at vertical already. So it's really easy to over push it and end up doing one of these. So it wants to be vertical, so it doesn't take quite as much work. However, the view, and I don't remember if the extra did this too or not, but it feels like you have to start the recovery super early. It's still about 100 degrees, but what happens is if we're starting here and I want to finish going this direction, so it comes around 1, everything's changing, but it looks like the wing drops. So if you look off the nose, you still feel like, oh, I'm still at 1 turn. Well, the wing's over here. You're actually at that 100 degrees prior. So it looks like you're doing it at almost a half turn before you stop, where before is only a quarter turn. So it looks like you have to go way early, and then it'll stop. But that's just timing. It's just getting consistent and figuring out the timing for it, and then making adjustments. That works really well. Weight and balance and things will change it slightly when you're flying with a lot of different people, but it's all timing on the spin. Interesting one the ballistic question led to. I don't know if there's more topic on ballistic you want to talk about. I can diverge all over the place. It's no big deal. Yes. Basic, yeah. It's dependent on the airplane. With Decathlon, I joke it's like a stop with camel. It's either full or it's nothing. So I'll leave it full for everything until I want to spin and then pull it out. There is some tricks with that and there actually is one more spot where I change it, so I'll get to that one too. So on the 45, a few of my students were trying to like cut power and then go here, kind of ballistic, and then go into the spin. You have to have a line, like we talked about, between the figures. So I have them go 45, get slow, so we're going through, maybe 60, 50 miles an hour. So around 60 when they see it, push over, leave the power in, and then start walking out once they're level. And that'll give them 3 to 5 seconds, and then they'll be at their spin deck angle. So at that point, stall horn, count to 3, rudder, then stick smoothly all the way back, and it'll drop in where they want it to. So I'm power out for the spin. Once it recovers, full power and go. The only other one that I usually do is and this kind of is when you're stepping up. So in the sportsman category, we have a split S type maneuver where this is the hardest one actually. I can show you the trick for this too. It's a 2 of 4 and then a half loop down. You're at low speed for that, and that makes it difficult. The manual says it's rolling first, so start at 130. Please don't. You gain 50 miles an hour, so you'll be at V&E by the time you hit the bottom. So I usually have them start slow. With 2 people up in a decathlon, it's around 95. If I can get them to 100, that works out well too. But we'll hit first point, second point, and now we'll float. Now, at here, if it's starting to build up speed, that's where I'd pull power on the way down just to keep it slow, and then I don't need as much G, and I'm not worried about V&E. Normally, if you can keep the power in, you'll have more overall energy for your next figure. So it really depends on what your speed is, how it's building, so that you're within the limits of the aircraft. And that's the one exception I have. There's a second one too. If I have to do a roll going downhill, and I need the line to be a little bit longer, then I'll reduce power to give myself a little more time, but it is actually better if I have power on, because then I can save altitude. If I have power off, I'm sacrificing the altitude to try to make it look good, or to have enough time in the roll, because it doesn't roll fast and you accelerate faster than you may have time for the roll component for. So those are kind of those balances with the limit of the airplane, the roll rate, and then where things are at. But that's where I'll plan higher altitude for that specific part. I'll cut power to give myself more time to get the roll through, then add power. It would be better to leave it on the whole time, but it's limits. So it just kind of depends. So that's where I do that. Now, when I was flying the and the extra, then that's where I could use power to adjust the upline. So Kirby Chambliss Edge 540, those will go up forever. And the show he did the last couple days has been awesome. It's been really tight. I think the first time I saw an Edge 540, it went like, wah, 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 wah. I'm like, come back. Kuntz is here. Where are you? I can't, like it just goes up and it just keeps going. So in that case, there is a top of the box in the competition. The advantage of having that kind of vertical capability allows you to start at the bottom of it, during the sequence, and then work your way up, and you always keep right in front. But there are ways that you can end up too high, and so at that point, then you're okay. I'll manage power because I have more for that machine. With the Decathlon, there is no more. You have to use all of it. With the extra, it depends on which version and how heavy, and the SCs have plenty, the LXs, pretty good roll rate. The 300s with advanced and unlimited now, it's all of it. But I've been able to, Julian was harassing me because we were doing some flying. He's like, do you pull power on your hammerheads? I'm like, no, I just reduce power to not go out the top of the box because I wasn't sure where the top was in our practice area we were at. And then add power to do the pivot, so I have rudder authority, and then keep power in going down. But that's where in competition, if I go vertical and roll too early, I'm like, I still have too much speed. Okay, now I can pull power to slow it down a little bit and get it back in, so I can pivot so that the roll is in the middle. Just try to work the angle. So there are, like I said, stepping up. It's more than just a basic technique, but that's kind of where I'm at with power. If you're going downhill and you don't like the speed, get rid of power. Otherwise, use all of it to go up, and if you're coming down, you'll save altitude if you have power on. So that's kind of the trick, because gravity will do its job to a certain point. If you help it, you'll get there faster. So, yep. If you got to start rolling, that's a whole different story. But yeah. Yep. What the process is? Yeah, so our course is set up where we start with basically introduction to the aircraft and spins and a little bit of upset recovery. And then I think there is a difference between upset recovery training and strict aerobatic training, but I think they enhance each other. So we'll do that, and then we'll start getting into rolls early because they're one of the most fun ones, but they're also one of the more challenging ones to master. So we get rolls, we work on our loops, we do some inverted flying, just kind of get that feeling and make sure we're cinched down. Then we start combining rolls and loops together, because that's what your Cuban is, or all the weird names we give for things. It's just part of a loop, and then you put a roll on it. Or the same thing with the implement. It's part of a loop and then part of a roll. So once you've got those basics of loops and rolls, then everything else is just some combo. And you can see that at the air show until you start getting tumbly stuff in it. So we get that down. Then we do some combos, and then I have them start building basic sequences. So I'll have them have a very simple sequence, which is it's a loop into a Cuban into a Immelman, just so they can go from maneuver to maneuver. So I get them through a basic aerobatic course first, and then after that, if they're interested in competition, then we do a few more hours tailored towards putting the sequence together, getting our energy management up to do that, and then as well as potentially our physiology, just get used to going maneuver to maneuver, because it's a workout. And then once we've got that set and they're at altitude and comfortable with the machine, I'm not worried about an unusual attitude or them falling out of a maneuver, or I know that if they do fall out of one, they're going to recover on their own. Then I'll bring it down. We have an aerobatic wavered airspace where I've got a box that we can run at competition altitudes. Now for sportsmen and primary, you don't actually need a box. You just need to have legal airspace to do it in, which means You're not in controlled airspace for the purpose of an airport that goes to the surface, so not over Oshkosh unless there's a waivered box. But a lot of uncontrolled airports are fine. It can't be over a congested area, so no groups of houses or people or those types of things. And you're above 1,500 feet AGL, which is our floor for sportsmen in primary. So you don't need to go, I mean, you can get an aerobatic box, but it's not necessary to do sportsman training. And then you have to be off of a Victor airway by at least 4 miles. So you get all those things worked and go through, and you can ask any of the IC members if you're looking at airspace. But then we have a practice area. We'll go there, we'll critique, and then get kind of the perspective from what does it look like for the ground. Because in the airplane, there are occasions where it's like, I'm on it, nailed it, every time. And then you get on the ground, you're like, you are shallow by about 10 degrees. You're climbing at 30. You are going to get a 6. It will not be a 10. Or if we do something weird in the loop, like it might feel perfect, but it turns out that they're coming through and then they're closing really high, so it has a weird E shape, or they're floating at a weird spot, so it turns tall. And as you gain experience, you'll be able to, like, I can usually tell my students if they're doing that from inside the airplane, but that all takes time. It takes no time if you have somebody outside with a radio. They don't even need to be a pilot. Like, what did the loop look like? It looked like a really tall thing. Okay, cool, okay, this is where, did it look round yet? What looked flat? You know, it's, that's easy to see. Does this look like a 45-degree angle? I don't know, like, hold up that way. Okay, yeah, 45 or not. And so getting that ground critique and being able to tune it up really helps. And that's what accelerates being competition ready. And then approach any of us at the contest. It's a great community. We'll harass each other, make sure everything's good to go. All right, other questions? Oh, people are starting to jet. It's 11. There's other things to go to. I'll hang out for a while and I'll show weird, goofy videos of things. But otherwise, thank you for your time. I hope it was informative.